What's up, you guys? I am Kate King. I am a licensed therapist, and you're with me at my Healers interview series. So, thanks for being with me today. I've got something really exciting for you today with this interview with Becca Nowosielski. So it seems to me like these days most of us are walking around with the heavy burden of emotional and psychological trauma on our shoulders and in our hearts. So whether this looks like a traumatic experience that's happened to you, or a limiting belief system, or really difficult thoughts that you live your life kind of carrying around with you, Becca's going to talk to us today about her model of therapy, which is EMDR, which stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing. What a mouthful, right? Becca's going to tell us about what that means and how she uses something called bilateral stimulation to help us to work through those deep traumas and find some meaningful healing and some repair in our lives. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you can have access to not only these great interviews in this series, but also some of my other goodies that I've got here for you. All right, now I'll kick it off to Becca Nowosielski. All right. Hi, Becca. Thanks so much for being here with me today.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. Me too. So, before we get started and jump into the EMDR nitty gritty, do you want to just give us a little background about who you are and kind of how you came to this space?
Yeah, I would love to. I own and run a private practice in Denver and in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. I have been doing that for about 4 years. My practice itself is a mixture of couples and individuals who are looking for some support through EMDR. I also have a background in design and business development, which is not hyper important to who I am as a therapist, except just in the way that I connect to clients and the diversity and how I'm able to understand different aspects of the world.
Nice. Sounds good. So you have like a very broad kind of collection of tools that bring you to your therapy work.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, nice. So in the introduction, I explained a little bit about EMDR, and it stands for Eye Movement Desensitization Reprocessing. Can you make this like plain English for us and kind of tell us what that means?
Yeah. So the the long descriptor, the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, is a really good description of it, but it's quite wordy. So that's why we use EMDR so often. It's kind of amazing. The process of EMDR is actually something that our brains do naturally. So when we are sleeping, our brains take information from our day or from the past few days and start to filter it through all the various parts of our brain. So EMDR is essentially jump starting a process that happens within our brains naturally. What it means in layman's terms is bilateral stimulation. So that means either light from one side to another, repeated, sound in one ear and then the next, and repeated, or vibration in one hand and then the next, repeated. And that helps our brain filter information that might have gotten stuck because of trauma, essentially.
Okay, so unilateral means when something is only on one side of the body, and bilateral is when something is on both sides of the body. And I imagine that has something to do with the two hemispheres of the brain. Is that a cross connection? How, like, the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa?
Yes, bilateral stimulation stimulates one side of your brain and then the other, both hemispheres of your brain. And that's a really important component to this, the EMDR process. That is something that helps move the information through the correct channels in our brains, is that bilateral stimulation of both hemispheres of our brain.
Okay, so talking about sleep, is that what happens in REM when, if you look at someone who's in REM sleep, their eyes are kind of moving behind their eyelids?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, got it.
And it's really cool. The woman who discovered EMDR is a therapeutic treatment was actually walking outside, and she was noticing things like from one side to the next, and she was recognizing that this was mimicking the REM cycle of sleep. And so she started to explore what that might be able to do for our brains.
Nice. That's exciting that we're using something that's inherent to our body to sort of soothe our nervous system, to process our brain chemistry. It's cool that we already have that within us and we don't have to seek it from outside, but kind of use stimulants like light or buzzers to just evoke something we already have.
Yes, exactly.
So, can you tell us just a little bit about your lens of EMDR therapy? I know that therapist to therapist, sometimes things can look different.
I think for me, what EMDR is really about, of course, there are these kind of like big T traumas, large events that are not not singular, but very identifiable that there was a trauma and that this happened, and it created a belief that did not get reprocessed through our brain successfully. So it got stuck somewhere along the path from our amygdala to our prefrontal cortex, and so it stayed. And we latch on to this negative belief. So there's these big T traumas, and then there are little T traumas, which I think of as an experience that is significant, um, but you may not be able to articulate in the moment or in the moments after, saying like that really felt like trauma. But when you have an experience that generates a belief and that's reinforced over time, the same belief, it becomes bigger than just the original event or experience. And so I think it's important to address the both types of trauma, and amazingly EMDR can do that equally. It doesn't really matter what type of trauma you have had. The process is the same. It works the same, and it heals in the same way.
Nice. So, whether a big T trauma like a car accident or maybe a pandemic like we've just gone through, or a
Yes.
little T trauma would be maybe something like continuous neglect or, continuously not feeling like you're loved through time, building a core belief that you're not lovable, something like that builds into a trauma over time. It's really neat that you
Yes.
can access the same healing regardless what someone's story is. Why do you think that is?
What EMDR really addresses is when our experiences don't get processed fully and they get stuck along the way. And so I really think it's about no matter what our experience, that the process is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's a big trauma or something repeated and reinforced over time, those beliefs still get stuck within our brains and within our processing systems.
Hmm.
So we can just use the same approach.
So it's basically like the nuts and bolts of the human brain and the human experience are kind of the same depending on wherever you fall on that continuum of trauma. And I think we
Yes.
all must have, you know, traumas of all kinds in our systems at all times. And maybe we're all doing EMDR without even realizing it when we walk on the beach and we watch the waves come in and out, or, you're sitting outside and just sort of like looking around left to right. And maybe it's something intuitive that we do to soothe ourselves, but coming to someone like you for more intentional work to really kind of channel in that bilateral stimulation sounds like it can be even more effective. Can you tell me just a little bit more about your specific approach to EMDR?
Yes. One of the things that I like to talk to clients about at the beginning as we introduce EMDR and start to talk about it is that it it is a little bit more of a clinical approach, a procedural approach than traditional talk therapy. Um, the beginning of the EMDR process is all about creating that therapeutic relationship and joining and making sure that the client is very comfortable talking about their experiences with me and sharing those. Um, but after that, it does become a little bit more procedural. So there are, I think that this is where different therapists might have different approaches. But for me, I follow pretty closely the protocol. So there's certain steps. It's not that it's rigid by any means because it is a very flowing process.
Mhm.
But there are steps that make the EMDR process most effective. And one of the things that I think is important to reinforce is that this actually isn't really about talking about the experience, the belief. Of course, we're going to get some information to assess um, and to create a connection between the memory and the visual and your body, but it really isn't about um, like talking through it or reliving it because most people think that it might be. It's not exposure therapy.
Right, right. I could see
Yeah.
how that would kind of turn people off when they've already had such an impactful experience.
Yeah.
And people cope with their experiences in such different ways. I know you have an aspect of your work that kind of works with like the adaptive and the maladaptive ways that people kind of experience this. Can you speak a little to that?
Yeah, we go through our days, we have things that are positively reinforced, negatively reinforced. And so we really do develop an entire set of beliefs for our whole lives, right? Um, and many of those beliefs are what we call adaptive. So that means that you have an experience and that either reinforces or um, creates more skill for you to like productively live your life. It doesn't block anything. It just kind of helps us move forward. And then there are maladaptive experiences that inhibit us or take us either a step backwards or teach us something that reinforces that negative belief that inhibits us from like kind of successfully moving through our lives, through our day.
Okay. So maybe an example of an adaptive coping mechanism would be like if something feels really hard in your day, maybe you ask for support and you ask for help, and then you're able to move through your day in a more resourced way. And maybe a more maladaptive would be like grabbing a beer and getting drunk in the middle of the day to deal with the stress, something like that. Does that feel right?
Yes, exactly. When you ask for help and you receive that help, you receive the support, that is even more adaptive and that reinforces, let's say, a belief that like, um, I am loved. But if you were to reach out and ask for support and that support wasn't received, and you do the maladaptive thing of reaching for some type of substance um, or something like that, that reinforces the belief that like I'm not worthy of someone else's love. And that's a belief that we would target with EMDR.
Okay, got it. And those kind of beliefs do tend to be kind of reinforced over time because we tend to sort of create self reinforcing belief systems that support what we already know to be true about the world, whether it is really true or whether it's sort of our distorted view of what's true. Maybe the person we're asking for help isn't available, never has been available, and maybe we should start looking towards someone else to ask for help. But it would be maladaptive to keep asking an unavailable person for help and yet still reinforcing that we're not going to get what we need, we're not worth the love and the care, and so we may as well just use that substance.
Right.
So, in this specific example, how would you work with this with a person?
Yes, great question. For a person who has multiple experiences with a certain trauma. So, to stick with this scenario, someone who has had multiple experiences where they believe that they're not worthy of love, we would start with the first time that they could remember an experience of this.
Mm.
And it doesn't, you don't have to like search all the way back and find exactly the first time. But it's like, talk to me about the first time that this really hurt and you're still carrying it with you. Um, and then we would move on to the worst, the the experience that feels the worst, and then the most recent, and we would go from there. It needs to be something that you're still carrying, something that doesn't quite make sense. It's like we all have this really highly cognitive, rational part of our brains where it's like, I know I shouldn't feel this way. I can reason my way, I can talk my way out of feeling this way. But there's something in our core, in our heart, in our beliefs that won't let us move on.
Right. Yeah. And so that's like the hook of how it becomes an interior belief and not just a fleeting thought.
Right.
You're having the bilateral stimulation happening at the same time while they're recalling these events.
Yeah. So I think the beginning of the EMDR process, like I talked about a little while ago, is really about um, creating that therapeutic relationship. The foundation for the work is getting kind of a roadmap as a therapist so that I can help the process kind of naturally flow. I'll have that information beforehand. And then once we have kind of an understanding of what we need to address, resourcing, which basically means like giving a client a ton of coping skills to help them successfully, adaptively address anything that might feel challenging or just even like basic healthy self-soothing, because who doesn't need just some skills to like help us re-regulate and connect and be present with our emotions.
People come to you probably already having the coping skills that they use, whether they're healthy or not healthy, right? Some of them might be healthy. I call my friend, I go for a walk, I meditate, I journal, and others might be more like, I reach for that substance or I go back to that relationship that I know hurts me or, whatever they are. So this resourcing piece feels really important to make sure that people feel armed and kind of like they have this big library of tools, because I don't think that we can always rely on the exact same coping skill to work every time. And so having a variety of things that we can choose from feels important as well.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really what it's about. Is it's not like, hey, here's the right coping skill for you. It's let's give you a large variety of coping skills that you can use for various challenges that you're facing. And then you don't have to seek out, when you're struggling, the last thing we really want to do is like have to go find something and figure out how to successfully cope. So if you have an idea and a set of resources, you can just kind of, I mean, metaphorically grab for one, right? And say, like, I'm going to use this now. I'm
Mhm.
going to try this out.
So, do you have people write these down or record them somewhere so that they're just really easy to reference when they need them?
Yes, absolutely. We create a list of what feels useful. So part of the resourcing phase is really about trial and error. So here are some ideas. Let's try this coping skill, this resourcing technique. Does it work for you? If it does, fantastic. We'll put it on that list. If it doesn't work so well, let's either figure out how to make it better or set that one aside and address some others. And then we do create a list. I create that with my clients. I have them physically write it down, put it in their phones, emails, and so that, like I said, they can just, they're struggling and it's like, okay, here's a list of 10 things. Which one feels like it's going to be most useful for me?
Right. Can I put you on the spot and ask you what some of your favorite coping skills are, just to kind of give the viewers maybe just some ideas?
Yes, absolutely. Um, uh, I think most therapists believe in movement, right, as a therapeutic tool. So if you're struggling, move yourself from the space that you're in. It's just really about moving your body. Take your dog for a walk. Go outside with your kids. So movement is a big one. It's really neat within the resourcing phase of EMDR. There are some techniques that actually kind of slightly practice the bilateral stimulation to get you used to it. So that, once we're doing full reprocessing, it's a more comfortable thing. Um, One of those is called Calm Place. Uh, Other therapists call it safe place. Um, but the cool thing is that you don't actually need the bilateral stimulation to make that an effective coping tool. So I actually have a meditation, mindfulness, calm place on my website, where I walk you through creating that calm place. It's really about creating this visual and a sensation within your body that represents calm and peacefulness, and how can you practice accessing that at any time during the day. You don't have to be completely dysregulated. It might just be people might want to start or end their day there, um, spend a few minutes at their lunch break. So Calm Place is a really great coping mechanism and resourcing tool that I like. It's also a containment exercise where you essentially create a container for some of these negative thoughts that might be coming up, or if you're experiencing anxiety. And it can be anything. The diversity in what my clients have created is amazing. Everything from like planets to like wooden boxes that they've carved. It can be anything, and that is really a nice place to be able to visualize putting the things that you're struggling with, knowing that you're going to come back to them. It's not about like exile. It's about freeing yourself in the moment from those feelings and then coming back to them, because we know how important it is to address what we're actually experiencing.
Right,
Um,
right. But just sort of putting it somewhere safe until you feel like you're ready to be able to really handle it with care.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that really kind of brings me to an understanding of resourcing and how important that is, probably with all forms of therapy, but definitely with EMDR in mind. Are there any people in particular who you think EMDR works really well for, or people who you think EMDR is not a good idea for?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think that EMDR is applicable to anyone. I think that the important thing is making sure that a person is resourced enough to actually go into the desensitization and reprocessing phase of the work. Some people struggle with disassociation. That is a really common coping mechanism where we're in something and it feels like too much. And so we need to detach. And there's a really healthy way to detach. And there's ways that are less healthy that we want to make sure in the EMDR process that we're just aware of if that's happening.
Mhm.
So it's really about just kind of monitoring a person's readiness uh, for the actual reprocessing phase of EMDR.
Okay, so it's not necessarily that certain people wouldn't be a good candidate, but maybe that beginning stage you were talking about where you're building trust and you're building resources, maybe longer or shorter for different people, depending on kind of what they're coming in with and what they have to work with.
Exactly.
And if people are interested in EMDR, but they're not totally ready yet to come in for therapy, do you have resources that you would just offer to the viewers so that they have a starting place to just kind of get their feet wet?
Yes. Unfortunately, a lot of the books and things like that are quite clinical, which I think is hard even for me to really enjoy reading. But my website has a basic breakdown and description of EMDR and what they call EMDRIA, which is the kind of organization for EMDR, the International Organization for EMDR, has a great website, and that is EMDRIA, EMDRIA.org. They have great resources for clients and therapists or other practitioners, whether you're a therapist or not.
Okay,
Um,
great. So we'll be sure to go to your website, check out your resources. It sounds like you've got meditations there and information and a wealth of knowledge. So we'll make sure all of our viewers know how to get there, and also the Emdria website as well. And in closing today, are there any exciting offerings or happenings in your practice that you want to give a shout out to?
One of the things that I do want to mention that most people don't know about, but that's growing in the field of EMDR is that EMDR can be applicable for couples work as well. It's something that I have integrated into my practice, and it's a really beautiful process to watch, and is very successful, and especially really creating a deep connection between couples. And I think that that's just an important part and a really neat part of EMDR, that I wanted to share. And additionally, another great thing, kind of a silver lining of COVID, is that I have been able to successfully do EMDR via a telehealth platform, and honestly have found no disruption in my clients' work, and have been so incredibly successful.
That's amazing. And so, since your practice is in Colorado, you could essentially meet with anyone in any area of Colorado through telehealth and help them with EMDR and through your other approaches as well.
Yes, exactly. And I'm always more than happy to talk through each individual. If someone was to come to me and say, like, hey, I just want to explore, I want to get a little bit more information on what EMDR would be like for me. I offer a free consultation for people. And I'm always happy to have that conversation, whether you're a client or someone in the mental health or other field and are just interested in it. It's something I so wholeheartedly believe in and am so honored to witness that I'm always happy to have conversation about it.
Nice. I'm so glad. Well, thank you for sharing all of this wealth of information about EMDR. I feel much more clear now about it than I did when I was feeling intimidated by that long, definition of the acronym. So, thank you for clarifying that for us and for being with me here today. I really appreciate that you've been here.
Thank you so much, and I'm honored to be able to share this information. Thank you for the platform.